I was still wearing the white plastic hospital wristband when my son Greg looked up from his phone. This Saturday, all 13 members of my wife's family are staying here for 2 weeks, he announced. I stared at him, my hand instinctively resting over the thick bandage on my abdomen. I was 64 years old, and just 3 days prior, I had undergone major abdominal surgery. My discharge instructions were perfectly clear. Avoid lifting rest constantly and keep the incision clean. Greg and his wife Sarah had been living in my home for 3 years. When my husband passed away, they offered to move in to keep me company. In reality, they enjoyed a rent-free lifestyle while I paid the bills, bought the groceries, and maintained the property. Until now, I had tolerated their comfortable complacency. I took a slow, painful breath. I replied, "I just had surgery. Please postpone it until next weekend. I'll be in much better shape." He didn't even glance up from his glowing screen. He said coldly, "No one is waiting. Just do as I say." The sheer entitlement in his voice stung, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Arguing required breath and stamina I currently lacked. I simply nodded, turned around, and slowly made my way toward the staircase. I realized right then that Greg didn't see me as a mother recovering from a medical procedure. He saw me as the manager of a free hotel expected to facilitate his wife's family reunion. I reached my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my mattress. I didn't cry. Crying would agitate my stitches. Instead, I looked around my room and began to think. If Greg believed he could dictate the rules inside a house that I fully owned, he was operating under a severe misunderstanding of reality. I wasn't going to yell, and I certainly wasn't going to serve them. I just needed to prepare for the weekend. Saturday arrived with the slamming of car doors and loud, cheerful greetings echoing from the driveway. Suitcases rolled heavily across my hardwood floors, leaving faint scuff marks in their wake. The house instantly filled with overlapping conversations, the sharp shrieks of running children, and the chaotic energy of 13 vacationing relatives. I stood at the top of the stairs, leaning slightly against the banister. Down below, Sarah was directing traffic like a seasoned resort manager. "Put those bags in the front parlor," she instructed her cousins. "And the kids can take the air mattresses in the basement." Greg spotted me and frowned. He grabbed a heavy canvas bag of groceries from the kitchen counter and pointed at the stairs. "Mom, can you come grab these and start putting them in the pantry? Sarah's mom wants a snack, and we need to get lunch started." Every instinct from decades of motherhood urged me to walk down those steps and help. But a sharp twinge in my abdomen snapped me back to reality. I was not a maid, and I was not going to jeopardize my physical healing to save Greg from embarrassment. "No," I answered calmly. Greg blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean, no?" "They're our guests." "They are your guests," I corrected him. "I am recovering from surgery. The kitchen is yours to manage." Without waiting for his response, I turned around and walked back to my master suite. I heard Sarah mutter something sharply to Greg, followed by the heavy thud of the grocery bag hitting the counter. I closed my bedroom door, letting the heavy wood muffle the noise from downstairs. I knew this was only the beginning. Sarah was used to me handling the domestic load while she entertained, and my sudden refusal was going to disrupt her perfect family weekend. By the second morning, the noise downstairs was unbearable. The scent of burnt bacon drifted up through the floorboards, accompanied by the clinking of dishes and children arguing over the television volume. I remained in my room drinking a bottle of water and eating a protein bar I had stored in my nightstand the night before. Suddenly, the handle of my bedroom door rattled. When it didn't turn, someone knocked loudly. Mom Greg's voice filtered through the wood. "Unlock the door. Sarah needs the large roasting pan, and you keep it in your closet for some reason." "I'm resting," I called back. "Find something else to use." Silence fell for a moment. Then I heard the distinct metallic slide of a key slipping into the lock. Greg had kept a spare key to my room for emergencies since his father died. The door clicked open, and Greg stepped inside looking flushed and annoyed. "You can't just lock yourself away," he hissed, keeping his voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. "Sarah is stressed. Her parents are wondering why you're being so antisocial. You're embarrassing us." I sat up slowly, clutching a pillow to my stomach. I looked at the spare key dangling from his fingers. "Put that key on my dresser," I instructed, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "Mom, be reasonable. Put the key on the dresser. Greg, and step out of my room." He rolled his eyes, tossed the key onto the wooden surface, and stomped over to my closet to dig out the roasting pan. He marched out, leaving the door wide open. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall before getting out of bed. I retrieved the key, but I knew it wasn't enough. A physical boundary is only as strong as the lock that secures it, and a standard doorknob wasn't going to protect my peace. On the third day of the visit, the scheduled home health nurse arrived to check my incision. Her name was Brenda, a no-nonsense woman with a heavy medical bag and a sharp gaze. She stepped through the front door and immediately stopped. Two toddlers were racing toy cars across the hallway rug. Sarah's uncle was shouting at a sports game on the living room television. The kitchen counter was buried under a mountain of sticky dishes. Brenda navigated the obstacle course and found me resting in an armchair in my bedroom. She checked my vitals and carefully examined my stitches. "How much rest are you actually getting in this environment?" Nadine Brenda asked, raising an eyebrow. Before I could answer, Greg walked into the room without knocking, carrying a stack of dirty towels. "Hey, Mom, the washing machine is making a weird noise. Can you come look at it later?" Brenda stood up, her posture rigid. She turned to Greg, speaking in a clear, professional tone that carried straight out into the hallway. "Your mother is recovering from invasive surgery," Brenda stated. "This environment is entirely unsuitable for a surgical patient. If she exerts herself or fails to rest in a quiet, stress-free space, she risks severe complications. My medical recommendation is an immediate reduction of household noise and responsibilities." Greg turned red. "We're just visiting. She's fine." Brenda didn't argue. She simply documented her notes and handed me a copy. "Take care of yourself, Nadine. Don't let anyone push you." After Brenda left, Greg scoffed, tossing the towels onto my floor. "She's overreacting. Anyway, we need more toilet paper down there." He walked out. I looked at the dirty towels on my floor. Greg wasn't going to change his behavior, and Sarah certainly wouldn't. I had allowed them to treat my home like their personal property for too long. It was time to start taking my property back. Later that afternoon, Sarah's family decided to take a group trip to a nearby shopping outlet. Greg and Sarah went with them, leaving the house blessedly empty for the first time in days. I didn't waste a minute. I walked down to the garage, retrieved my late husband's heavy metal toolbox, and carried it upstairs. Inside was a heavy-duty brass slide bolt. It took me 30 minutes and a lot of slow, careful movements, but I managed to install the thick bolt on the inside of my bedroom door. No spare key could bypass this. Next, I walked downstairs to the living room. Tucked behind the sofa was the main Wi-Fi router. I unplugged it, coiled the wires, and carried the entire unit up to my bedroom. I plugged it back in beside my nightstand, reset the system, and changed the network password. Finally, I went online and arranged for a private meal delivery service to bring pre-cooked, healthy dinners directly to my window via the side gate. I wasn't going to set foot in that kitchen until the house was empty. Around 5 o'clock, the front door opened, bringing the familiar wave of loud voices and chaotic footsteps. A few minutes later, I heard Sarah's heavy footsteps march up the stairs, followed by a jiggle of my door handle. Nadine, Sarah called out. She jiggled the handle harder. "Nadine, the internet isn't working." "And I need to get into your bathroom. The kids clogged the hallway toilet. I sat in my armchair reading a book. I slid my thumb over the edge of the page, completely ignoring the noise. I was safe, secured, and comfortable. The knocking continued for a few minutes before Sarah finally gave up, stomping back downstairs in frustration. I opened my laptop and logged into my primary bank account. For the past 3 years, I had kept a joint credit card active that Greg was authorized to use. It was originally meant for household emergencies, a broken water heater, a flat tire, things of that nature. Over time, however, the charges had slowly morphed into streaming subscriptions, takeout dinners, and bulk grocery trips. I had let it slide because I wanted to help them save for their own home. I reviewed the pending transactions. In the last 3 days alone, Greg had charged nearly $400 for premium groceries, alcohol, and pizza for his wife's family. I was funding the very invasion that was ruining my recovery. I clicked the Manage Cards tab, selected Greg's authorized card, and hit Revoke Access. I didn't stop there. I went into my utility accounts and paused the premium cable television package, dropping it down to basic local channels. I leaned back against my pillows, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't throwing them out onto the street, and I wasn't screaming in the hallway. I was simply removing my financial support from the equation. If Greg and Sarah wanted to host 13 people for 2 weeks, they were entirely welcome to pay for the privilege themselves. Downstairs, I heard a chorus of groans as the television abruptly lost access to the premium sports package. The house was slowly shifting from a 5-star resort back to reality. The next morning, my new slide bolt rattled violently. Greg pounded his fist against the heavy wood of my door. "Mom, open the door," he demanded. I marked my page in my book, walked over, and slid the bolt back. I opened the door just a few inches, blocking the gap with my body. Greg looked furious. "My card was declined at the grocery store this morning. I had 2 carts full of breakfast food and meat for tonight's barbecue, and the cashier told me the account was locked, and the Wi-Fi is gone." What is going on? I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout of the credit card statement from the past 3 days. I handed it to him. "The card was for emergencies, Greg. Funding a 2-week vacation for 13 people is not an emergency," I stated calmly. "You are the host this week. You need to pay for your guests." Greg stared at the paper, his face turning pale. "But I don't have enough in my checking account to feed all these people for 2 weeks. Sarah's parents expect a certain level of hospitality. Then I suggest you explain your financial reality to them," I noted. "And the router is in my room because I need peace to work and rest. The internet is not a necessity for a family vacation." "You can't do this to us," he whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "I didn't invite them, Greg," I reminded him. I stepped back and smoothly closed the door, sliding the heavy brass bolt back into place. By day 4, the atmosphere in the house had turned drastically. Without my credit card funding, the meals, the premium cable providing entertainment, and the Wi-Fi keeping the children distracted, Sarah's family was growing restless and irritable. That afternoon, I decided to take my doctor-mandated short walk. I unbolted my door and slowly descended the stairs, clutching the handrail for support. The living room was tense. Sarah's parents were sitting on the sofa, looking deeply unimpressed, with a cheap box of generic cereal sitting on the coffee table. Sarah was pacing, while Greg looked entirely defeated in the corner. Sarah's mother noticed me first. She stood up, crossing her arms. "Nadine, it's a bit unusual for a hostess to hide away while her guests are left to fend for themselves. Don't you think Sarah told us you'd be handling the cooking?" I paused at the bottom step. I looked at Sarah, who immediately averted her eyes. "I am not the hostess." I explained, my voice steady and clear. "I am a patient recovering from major abdominal surgery. This is my home, but Greg and Sarah are the ones who invited you. I assumed they had prepared to accommodate and financially provide for you during your stay. Sarah's mother blinked, her harsh expression faltering. She turned to look at Greg. You told us she was fully recovered. You said she wanted us here? Greg stammered, shrinking under his mother-in-law's glare. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I completed my slow loop around the downstairs hallway, retrieved a fresh bottle of water from the kitchen, and walked back up to my sanctuary. The truth was out, and I didn't have to defend myself anymore. The illusion was entirely shattered. Sarah could no longer pretend she was the mistress of a fully staffed estate, and Greg could no longer hide behind my wallet. The reality of hosting 13 people on a limited budget without a maid quickly overwhelmed them. The meals devolved into cheap sandwiches and canned soup. The children, bored without internet, began complaining loudly. The adults, realizing that Greg had lied to them about my condition and his own resources, grew visibly uncomfortable. On the morning of the 5th day, I looked out my bedroom window and watched Sarah's uncle loading suitcases into the trunk of his SUV. Sarah was standing on the porch, crying and waving her hands in frustration, while Greg stood silently behind her, rubbing the back of his neck. They were leaving. The 2-week vacation had collapsed in less than a week. I watched the cars reverse out of the driveway and disappear down the street. The house fell completely silent for the first time since Saturday. There were no running footsteps, no shouting, no clattering dishes. Just the quiet hum of the air conditioner. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension finally leave my shoulders. My incision felt less tight. My mind felt clear. I unlocked my door and walked downstairs. The living room was a disaster of crumpled blankets and empty cups, but it was empty. Greg was sitting at the kitchen island, staring blankly at the wall. He looked up when I walked in. He looked exhausted, embarrassed, and angry. But I didn't feel sorry for him. You ruined the visit, Greg muttered, refusing to make eye contact. Sarah is upstairs packing a bag. She's furious. Her family thinks we're a joke. I walked over to the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water with ice, the sharp clinking sound echoing in the unusually quiet room. Your lies ruined the visit, Greg. You expected me to finance and facilitate a 2-week vacation at the expense of my own health. I simply stopped participating. We're your family, he snapped, finally looking at me. His face flushed with frustration. Yes, you are, I agreed, which is why I allowed you to live here rent-free for 3 years to save money. But you haven't saved. You've just grown comfortable spending my money and treating me like an employee in my own home. Footsteps thudded heavily on the stairs. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, a designer duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She glared at me, expecting me to apologize, expecting Greg to demand my submission. I didn't say a word. I simply picked up a damp cloth and calmly wiped a sticky ring of spilled juice off my quartz countertop, reclaiming my kitchen 1 inch at a time. Sarah scoffed. Greg, let's go. We're staying at a hotel tonight. I can't believe your mother is being so selfish. Greg didn't move. He looked down at his shoes. His authorized credit card was canceled and his personal checking account was empty. He didn't have the money for a hotel, and we all knew it. I reached into the pocket of my robe and pulled out a manila folder I had prepared the night before. Inside was a single crisp sheet of paper. I slid it across the kitchen island. Greg frowned, looking down at the document. What is this? It's a standard month-to-month lease agreement, I explained calmly. If you and Sarah wish to continue living in this house, you will pay market rate rent and you will cover your own utilities and groceries. If you don't want to sign it, you have 30 days to find your own apartment. Sarah dropped her bag, the heavy thud breaking the tension. Rent? Are you serious? We're trying to build our savings. We can't afford market rate rent right now. Your savings are not my financial responsibility, Sarah, I replied, taking a slow sip of my water. The free ride ended the moment you both decided my surgical recovery was less important than your family's convenience. By the way, the Wi-Fi router stays locked in my room until the first rent check clears. Greg stared at the paper in absolute shock. He opened his mouth to argue but closed it just as quickly. He realized there was nothing left to debate. I held all the keys both literally and figuratively. I wasn't yelling and I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. My incision eventually healed, leaving a pale scar. Greg and Sarah signed the lease, suddenly finding the motivation to work overtime and respect my space. They bought their own groceries, cleaned up after themselves, and learned to knock before speaking to me. We didn't have a tearful reconciliation, and our relationship remained politely distant. But for the first time in years, my home was truly mine. And I finally stopped treating my own well-being as something that could wait. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have kicked them out immediately, or was offering the lease the right move? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in setting firm boundaries and taking back control of your life, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories.